Rachelle Barbour has worked as an assistant federal defender at the Sacramento Federal Court for over 20 years. She's our guest this week on Everyday Injustice. Welcome.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
I guess talk a little bit about your work as a federal defender and how did you come to doing that?
Yeah, I don't think it's what I planned to do when I went to law school. I came out of law school and clerked for a judge in San Francisco in a civil court and realized really quickly that that was not the world I wanted to practice in. I really liked my crim law classes. I really liked working with people, for people, being able to help them go through a really tough time in their lives. So I was very drawn to that, and public defense seemed like a great way to be able to help the people that I wanted to focus on.
So is it basically a public defender in federal court?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Our district is huge. We're in the Eastern District of California here in, Sacramento and Davis. We're in the northern part of the district. It goes all the way to the Oregon border, goes all the way over to the Nevada border, contains the Sierras. It goes all the way down to Bakersfield. It is a huge district, and it's a fascinating place to practice law because we have big urban centers, we have big rural areas, we see all kinds of stuff. So it definitely is, public defender, federal court, but it captures a lot more than I think Sacramento County public defender would see routinely.
Well, definitely. A few years ago, I covered, it was actually a civil case in federal court, but it went to trial. And so the jury pool went from Chico and Redding all the way down to Sacramento and Yolo County. It was a tremendously broad cross section of people.
And our cases can take a long time. And imagine being a juror from Red Bluff and coming down to do a federal case that might take weeks. So we're asking a lot of our jurors, and they do come from all over. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the one we covered was a multi-week, police shooting case. So, it was intense and it was long.
Yeah. Federal cases, I'll tell you about the clinic, and we do quite a bit of misdemeanor work there, but federal felonies tend to be very involved. And the ones that go to trial are often pretty serious cases that take a while.
And tell us a bit about the clinic.
Sure. So, I work for the federal government. That's the great thing about being a public defender, is that the government pays us to fight the government. So it's kind of perfect as far as, being able to do direct work on behalf of the people that our own government is trying to put in jail. It's pretty amazing. But we also have a clinic with McGeorge School of Law. It was started about 10 years ago. We've always had law students in our office, and we always had law students from McGeorge that would come for a term or a summer and learn, what public defenders do. And often they would become public defenders themselves, and that was great. That was formalized about 10 years ago. I was not part of starting the clinic, but Carrie Bricker, Professor Bricker at McGeorge, started it with a former public defender in my office, and we've just kept it going. And we have 8 students. They're all third-year law students, so they're in their last year of law school. They want to have the type of experience that we offer, where they handle caseloads, deal directly with clients, go to court, appear in court, do trials, file motions, everything that a lawyer does, our students can do in misdemeanor cases. And they have to have client consent, of course. The clients have to be fine with it, and they're usually thrilled because they get attention that is unparalleled from students who are really into what they're doing. So it's a lot of fun. I teach in the clinic. And we teach a seminar, and then we also have the students in our office.
And as I understand it, that's fine as long as there's supervision, right?
Oh, yeah. So I know the state bar has its own practice rule that applies to students working in state court. Our federal court has a really great student practice rule. Obviously requires 100% supervision of what they're doing, but it allows the students to get certified through the federal court to appear in misdemeanor cases. And our judges have been really great about, having students in front of them, treating them like real lawyers, but also taking the time to help them understand what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, providing feedback. I think it's been a very successful program.
And federal court is very different from state court in a lot of ways. I haven't done a huge amount, but there's sentencing guidelines and some other quirks. Are you able to kind of describe some of those key
Sure.
differences?
Sure. So, again, big difference between felony cases and the types of misdemeanors that our students handle. But this whole idea of mandatory minimums and sentencing guidelines, that's all, when we're talking about that, we're talking about federal court. And we're talking about, Congress and folks in DC making guidelines and rules that apply across the board. So that, we're seeing, for example, in marijuana cases or in other drug cases, really, really harsh sentences, mandatory sentences, and then guidelines that go even above that. So there's less responsiveness to what's going on in the local community than you would have in a county setting, or where you have the California legislature deciding things and they can kind of see, the trends in California and respond that way. We're dealing with a Congress that's pretty gridlocked anyway. So even when things are changing and there's, even when there's a recognition that in the past there's been some over incarceration, some abuses of the system, it takes an awful long time for the folks in DC to fix that. And some of those things have yet to be fixed.
So what does a typical case look like for you? Like what kind? I know that was not a fair question.
Well, yeah,
but I mean, yeah,
federal cases are really different than the cases that our friends at the county PD see. We don't tend to see cases of person-on-person violence unless there's something federal about it. I mean, that's what's odd about this, is that for something to come to federal court, there has to be something federal or that can be recognized as federal to get it into federal court. Now, what's federal, drugs are federal because you buy and sell them, and they might get grown in another state, or they might get brought across state lines. Computer crimes, fraud. I mean, we just saw the Theranos trial in San Jose. Fraud cases can be federal because you use computers, you use telephones, you use the mail. What you're not going to see is street crime. You're not going to tend to see like a stolen car or a mugging or that kind of thing, unless the car that's stolen is a postal vehicle, or the mugging is of a person, who's doing their job as a federal worker, a canvasser or something like that. So the typical case, we do see a lot of pretty big drug cases. We see a lot of gun cases. Felon in possession is a case that gets brought federal a lot. And that's because of a view that in state court, the sentences are not high enough. So that there's been task forces that have used the fact that a gun is involved as a means to pull a case federal and try to hammer some folks and put them away. What else do we see a lot? Yeah, fraud, anything, like I said, it has to be federal, right? So certain
right.
types of benefits.
So who are your clients normally?
They are from all over our district. We have plenty of clients from right here in Sacramento, but because our district is so large, they might be from, Redding, Vallejo. It really runs the gamut. because of the types of cases that are brought federal, we might see drugs and gun cases that, could as easily be taken into county court. But we might also see fraud cases and other types of cases that you would never see in county court. And those types of cases are going to be different. I mean, one thing that's very true, I think, for federal cases is they don't tend to be reactive in the way that we see in county court. A crime happens, someone gets caught, and it gets charged the next day. Federal cases tend to be investigated for a long period of time by, the FBI, the DEA, ATF, and then when they're ready to go, they go get an indictment or they file a complaint. And then we're looking at a case that's already been worked up, and we're trying to figure out what happened and how to help our client.
So let's talk a bit about Omar Ameen.
Sure. Yeah, we could talk about Omar. Yeah.
So where is he right now?
He is at the Golden State Annex, which is in McFarland down by Bakersfield. It's a private facility contracted to ICE. So he's in immigration detention right now.
And so let's back up like 15 steps here. So this case started in 2018, is that right?
That's right, in August of 2018, yeah.
And what kind of triggered his involvement?
He was arrested in August of 2018 on an extradition complaint. So, we'd have to back up another 15 steps to kind of get to August 15th, but, and some of it is, beyond my knowledge. But what I can tell you is somebody told somebody that they thought they saw Omar in Iraq in 2014 as an ISIS commander committing a killing. That led to charges in Iraqi court. That led to the US government deciding they wanted to use their power to go after Omar and to arrest him and send him back. Omar is a refugee here from Iraq. So that all sounds really bad, right? Like, in August of 2018, that sounds pretty terrible that there is a person accused of being an ISIS commander and of killing, a policeman in Iraq who's been living here in Sacramento. And that's where that word accused of becomes really important, right? Because defense attorneys are always sort of saying, hey, presumption of innocence, these are mere allegations. And with Omar, that turned out to be exactly what was going on, that he was literally not even in Iraq at the time, that he was in Turkey at the time, and that it was absolutely false. And yet he is still facing removal to Iraq through the immigration system. But at the very least, we won the case in our federal court in Sacramento, and he was released, and he's, was not extradited on this case that he had nothing to do with. Problem being that the US government is still going after him as hard as they ever were.
So I've read a few articles on this, but I'm still not clear. What was the evidence other than the witness, or was there?
I mean, that's pretty much it. The problem being that extradition is one of these rare beasts, even in US courts, where you don't actually have to prove that the person did anything. It's literally just, there is a charge out there in a different country, and we have a treaty with that country, and the US is deciding that they want to send that person back. Which, if you're dealing with countries with, trustworthy criminal justice systems, it is already somewhat concerning, because you're taking this person into custody, you're calling them a fugitive, and you're going to send them halfway around the world to stand trial. But at the very least, maybe you have some faith that there's some evidence that's reliable behind that. However, and that's why, and usually the US does not try to do extraditions with countries that don't have well-functioning criminal justice systems, except that they did with Iraq in Omar's case. And why? I could only speculate why the US thought it was really important in 2018 to talk about, Muslims sneaking into our country who are secret terrorists. I mean, certainly made quite a splash politically, but that's the very problem. So back to your question, one witness claiming that he saw Omar, and someone who honestly has no reason to even know who Omar is or what he would look like, and then we started digging and found out a lot more about that witness and who was behind him.
And I guess I'll ask this one. How does this case then get to you? Why were you assigned to it?
Because I'm a federal public defender. So one of the wacky jurisdictional things that come to federal court is international extradition cases. So it got filed in our court in Sacramento because Omar lived in Sacramento, and it came to us just like every new case comes to us. We take duty day and we're on call. We're like a ER physician. It's our day, and what comes in we deal with. And that's exactly how things got started. And we've done other extradition cases, nothing like this before, in terms of the complexity and the fact that he's innocent. But yeah, it's pretty normal for us to do extradition. It's just one of these funny jurisdictional things.
But how is this case unusual from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I wish this case was done. I wish Omar was home. So in a way, I'm still talking about a case where his life is at stake. Omar not only was innocent, but we could prove it, right? Like, this wasn't just, I didn't do it. This was, I was 600 miles away. I had nothing to do with this. I was living my life. I had a job. My family was there. My friends were there. I was on social media. I had a cell phone. And somehow that was not enough for the US government. And I don't understand. There's a lot I don't understand about why the answer wasn't like, oops, I guess we're relying on the wrong people in Iraq. We probably should go figure that out. But that's never been the response. So, it was dealing with a murder case, a death penalty case from years before in a different country with a different language, where my client was himself in a third country with its own language. We had to do international investigations. We had to get Omar's cell phone records from Turkey. It's just wild. So yeah, I really hope there will be no other case like this case. Yeah.
Well, that I didn't even think about that. I mean, do you guys have the resources to be able to send somebody halfway across the world and investigate this stuff?
When you look at what the government's willing to do, there's no end of resources that they will spend, right? I mean, the FBI agents flying around the world all the time doing investigations and flying back and forth across the US. And I am lucky that our office was able to find ways for us to do this. And we also had people just offer to help. It's amazing that we were able to sort of cobble this together on the resources that we have. And we were able, I can only think of the type of investigation we could have done if we'd had, the amount of resources that the US government continues to pour into this case. But yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like, and I deal a lot with state courts, and a lot of times people are really, public defenders unfortunately get a bad name. And, in a lot of places, especially in California, you have really good public defenders, and California is actually a well-financed system. You go into other states and, some of the stereotypes kind of pan out, unfortunately, because they're just not putting the money into it. But I don't think a lot of people understand that, how much money you would have to spend on a private attorney to get the kind of investigation that you guys had to do, because you would have to pay for that out of pocket somehow, which is not cheap.
Yeah, I've never gone back to try to add up the hours and hours that the team spent on this case. And that was necessary. I mean, every single thing we did turned out to be necessary to the judge's ultimate ruling that Omar had nothing to do with this murder. I went back and sort of thought about some little maybe I'll ask this person if they'll help us, and how some of those things really did pan out and help us seal the deal when we got Omar's cell phone records. And we're a well-financed, federal defender agency. And now Omar is in immigration court with pro bono counsel, because people are not entitled to a public defender in immigration court. So, we still have the whole might of the federal government coming after Omar in immigration court. And he's very, very lucky that some excellent lawyers at Immigrant Legal Defense in Oakland were willing to take his case pro bono and put incredible amount of work into it. That's just not fair. If our government's trying to destroy someone's life, it should provide the defense for that person to exonerate themselves.
As I hear the description in this case, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Brandon Mayfield case, except that in that case, it was the Madrid bombing, and it was the erroneous fingerprint identification that tied him. But they were able to kind of figure out pretty quickly that they had the wrong person. And so while he went through torment for a brief period of time, he eventually got out, and he didn't have to face trial, and he didn't have to face extradition and all of that. This is just prolonged agony.
Yeah, I mean, it was obvious from the beginning, as soon as we explained to Omar what was going on and what he was being accused of. And he said, we thought we were getting a mistranslation, right? He was saying, but I wasn't in Iraq, I was in Turkey. And we were just like, wait, what? And, we over and over, we took our findings to the government to say, hey, you're good people, right? You don't want to go after someone who's innocent. Like, let's talk about this. Maybe you just didn't know, you didn't realize he was in Turkey at the time. It happens, you relied on the wrong people. And nothing. I mean, nothing.
What's the response?
Just, well, we're going to keep going. Every once in a while they would say, well, he can have his trial on that in Iraq. He can raise those defenses in Iraq. And
not to get too political here, but I can kind of understand the former administration, pressing this case, but continuing it now seems a little strange too.
Yeah, I hope that someday we'll get some accountability on all of this. I definitely haven't seen any yet. And not only no accountability, but they are still pedal to the metal going after him. And it's really sad, and then the fact is, if he gets removed to Iraq, I mean, he will get killed. He will get tortured. They will get him to say he committed this murder that he was 600 miles away from, because that's how things work over there. And the torment is unbelievable.
And their only answer is, well, he can have due process in Iraq.
Um, you know, they're not like the government is not even engaged in that anymore. I mean, they're just so focused on winning the fight that's in front of them. And right now he's in immigration court. So Omar at the end of this month will have a hearing on whether he can be removed to Iraq. And that hearing will focus on whether he is likely to be tortured and whether he's likely to be persecuted. Things that seem obvious to me, having been living with this case since 2018, when one of the people behind this false case against Omar is a militia leader, a very powerful person in Iraq. And when we spoke to that person on the phone, he said, oh, if Omar gets sent back here, I'm going to take him out of official custody. And I think he said, do a little tribal thing and then have him executed. So it's not like we don't have to sort of guess what will happen. We're being told what will happen if Omar's returned. And that's outside the Iraqi judicial process. But even within the judicial process, Human Rights Watch has documented the torture that happens, the 10-minute trials, the inability to produce evidence. They don't, what are they going to do? Put on our case in Iraq? How does that work? So I'm really scared for Omar if he's returned. I think, it's horrible to say, but I think he has no shot if he's returned.
And what do you think his chances are in immigration court?
I think if the world is fair, the judge will look at the evidence and the experts that the immigration lawyers are presenting, and the judge will see that it's absolutely clear that Omar will be tortured and killed if he's returned. And if the judge makes that finding, he should be allowed to stay here. And there's all kinds of technical stuff that I, as a public defender, am not up on, the lingo, but that he should be allowed to stay in the United States and be protected. The fact that he was set up with a false case by Iraqi government actors that pursued him halfway around the world is pretty clear he's being persecuted. So that's the proof, and we'll see what the judge does with it.
So you're working on any other interesting cases at the moment?
Oh, it's never boring. That's part of why I like this job. There's always something. The COVID pandemic has affected us in all kinds of ways, from challenging our ability to communicate with our clients to, clients that we have in custody who have physical issues, who need a lot of help getting out. I really like to try to help my clients who are in the community stay in the community, especially now. So yeah, all kinds of stuff. Just was writing a letter to an old client who may get the benefit of some of these changes in California law and may get out of state prison early, and reached out to try to get some help if he comes out on federal supervision. So yeah, never go.
Is the federal supervision system better than the state one?
I would guess that there are more resources, and I think that the federal probation officers are very good and, really, it's a different system, but I think they're working more and more on dealing with barriers to reentry, figuring out how to provide resources, just how to help people be successful. So
I want to go back to the clinic for a second. You mentioned that they're working on misdemeanor cases. What does a federal misdemeanor case look like?
So yeah, we have a lot of federal land up in our district, right? Like all of the national forests and the Sierras. the Army Depot, post offices, wildlife refuges, the VA. We have a lot of federal places in our district, and one source of misdemeanors are all kinds of really petty little things that happen in those federal places. So I was thinking about this today because, we were working with the students. One source of misdemeanors are just, there's a VA police and they patrol the VA. And when things happen at the VA, they file federal charges. They give people tickets. And that's something as little as a parking ticket at the VA is federal. So, we've seen real, and that might not necessarily be something we get involved in, but we've seen, someone parked in a handicap spot at the VA, or, parked in the employee parking lot. That was a big one. Patients parking in the employee parking lot, employees parking in the patient spot, and the cops would write a ticket. And believe it or not, and this is what's mind blowing about this system, a parking ticket at the VA is truly a federal misdemeanor crime. So, so we handle those types of cases when they come in. We see it sort of seasonally up in the Sierras. You'll get the snowmobile tickets, you'll get the campfire tickets, you'll get the, camping out of bounds tickets, the hunting, we'll see the hunting stuff come in kind of all at once. Taking too many ducks, using the wrong kind of shot, baiting ducks. We had one student a couple years ago, he was our duck guy. Somehow we just gave him all the duck cases in a year, and he got really good at it. So it's kind of a wild mix. And it tends to be folks who don't see themselves as criminals. And that's, probably because they're not, right? What they did was like stay over in a campsite 6 hours too long or whatever it is. And it feels good to be able to help them when they're all of a sudden in federal court going, why am I here? And then we see, there's more, I guess what we would call real crimes. But not that many of them, honestly. The ones on the VA tend to be veterans who maybe are are there for treatment, for drug rehabilitation, for mental health issues, and might get a little frisky, and the VA cops come in and charge them. We see quite a few of that. We actually have a dedicated veterans court for those cases, and yeah, it's just sad.
What about like marijuana possession? Is that federally a misdemeanor?
Marijuana is such an interesting situation, right? Because here we are in California, and there's stores, it's everywhere. But yes, smoking weed at a campsite on a federal national forest could wind up getting someone a ticket for a misdemeanor. Because it gets enforced. It really does. There's a tiny little court in Yosemite, which we staff, and, drug cases are a big part of what we see there. Just simple, small amounts, just, someone being high on something in public. So yeah, we do see that. What we're not seeing, thankfully, is for the most part, big felony marijuana cases, but we did see those for a really long time. Well after
the federal government has stopped raiding cannabis dispensaries.
I haven't seen one of those in quite a while, but it did continue for a really long time after the tide had turned. And like I said, at the beginning, talking about this sort of centralization of policy in DC, that we have, I don't even know, is it a majority now of states that have marijuana legalized at some level, whether medicinal or recreational, and we still have it being a really serious felony in the federal system. And that I don't think anyone really thinks that's going to change anytime soon. So the only way to deal with that is by local authorities choosing not to enforce that law, which happily That's
Well,
what,
I know there's been talk about legalizing marijuana federally, but it never seems to get very far in Congress. And then the other big issue, of course, is the crack cocaine disparity. Have you had any of those cases?
I mean, we've had a lot of those cases, happily not all that many recently. And we've had a few judges that have been very brave and saying, you know what? The Sentencing Commission has repudiated any reason why crack should be different than powder. DOJ has repudiated any basis for crack being different than powder. Why am I being told to sentence this person for crack much more seriously than powder? So we've had some judges that have been open to hearing those arguments. And what's interesting is that the legacy of that, what's the right word? Like that lack of cohesion, lack of fairness between crack and powder, it lives on in other things. For example, methamphetamine was equalized to crack back when crack was 100-1 with powder. So, you start having this sort of fake numbers game where everything's made to look really scientific and really mathematical, but it's based on nothing. It's based on, policies that are built on air. And that takes a really long time for that stuff to get unworked and fixed. And I don't know that we'll ever see some of this stuff get fixed.
I would say it's worse than built on air. It's built on fear and racism.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you're looking at sort of the the stats that were brought to Congress in support of it, right? Clearly, those stats were built on complete racism.
So, last question, what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about becoming a federal defender?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Go to law school. That would be good. Not going to do it if you don't go to law school. I still, I may be one of those rare people that actually thinks going to law school is a good thing to do for your career. I mean, it has changed my life. And I love talking to law students. And I think getting as much experience working with people, especially, people who are in times of crisis. I mean, I love seeing incoming public defenders or students who have backgrounds in social work or counseling, because they're going to know our clients and they're going to meet them where they are. You really, really have to have a feeling for people to do this job, but you also have to be able to operate on the sort of legal plane and write motions and argue about the sentencing guidelines. So it works on both levels. But I think, for our students, I really want them to know what it's like to be a lawyer and to experience what it's like to be a public defender, so that if they decide to do it when they get out, they can hit the ground running. Because it's hard, you start as a PD and you get handed like cases, and law school usually doesn't teach you what to do at that point. So that's our goal, is to help the students know what to do.
Well, it's good because, you become a PD and you get handed all these misdemeanor cases. So you're kind of beating them to the punch a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm proud of our students. And we've had a lot of students go off and be PDs, and it's great for me, right? If I have a client with something pending in Orange County, I probably have a student there who's now a lawyer in the PD's office that I can, say, well, how do I deal with this? So it makes for a really nice community. And, every year we got 8 more. They don't all become PDs, but I would say a pretty decent number of them do. So, yeah, makes us proud.
Well, it sounds like a great program. And also want to thank you for coming on and sharing that horrible story. Incredible, but horrible story of
Yes.
Omar Ameen. I mean, every time I hear that, it just seems to get worse. Doesn't seem to be getting better.
Yeah. I mean, we are fighting as hard as we can. And, all incredible amount of credit goes to Omar's immigration lawyers, who work for a small nonprofit in the Bay Area and are handling his case completely free. I mean, you know, I get paid to fight the government. They don't. And it's just incredible. And I think of all the people out there who need immigration help. And if people want to donate to these immigration, you know, pro bono defense firms, I think that would be a great place for folks who want to help in this area to be able to help.
Well, thanks for coming on and sharing your story.
Thanks, David. I really appreciate the opportunity too.
This has been Everyday Injustice. We've been talking with Rachelle Barbour. She's an assistant federal defender at the Sacramento Federal Court. And she's been working on an amazing case, Omar Ameen. You should check it out. It is an incredible story. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.